My name is Clara Vance, and if you're sitting down with a cup of coffee right now, I want you to take a slow sip, look around your room, and ask yourself a question that took me nearly a decade to answer. Who actually owns the story of your life? Is it you? Or is it the people who claim to love you while quietly rewriting your triumphs into failures behind your back? Let me take you to a Wednesday morning, April 15th, at exactly 3 minutes to 8. I was standing in my own kitchen in Nashville. The morning sun was coming through the windows in a long, beautiful slant across the quartz countertops. I was holding my favorite ceramic mug with both hands, just trying to breathe in the steam, trying to find a pocket of peace before the chaos of my wedding week officially swallowed me whole. Then the doorbell rang. My sister Chloe walked in first, carrying a designer overnight bag she hadn't been invited to bring, just in case we need to stay over to help you with the seating charts. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with that performative, high-register sweetness she always used when she was about to take something that didn't belong to her. Right behind her was our mother, Patricia, elegant in a navy silk blouse, her eyes instantly scanning my apartment, measuring the value of my furniture, calculating the cost of my piece. They thought they were stepping into a trap they had spent weeks manufacturing. They didn't know the kitchen was already lost before they even crossed the threshold. We made small talk at the kitchen island for exactly 8 minutes. We talked about the rehearsal dinner menu, about a cousin's new baby, about whether the florist had secured the exact shade of white roses I wanted. And then my fiancé, Julian, walked out of the second bedroom. He was wearing a simple navy Oxford shirt and gray slacks, looking entirely unbothered, holding an empty mug. My mother missed half a second of breath when she saw him. She didn't think he'd be there, but she recovered quickly, smoothing down her blouse, offering him a warm, maternal smile that didn't reach her eyes. Chloe didn't wait. She set her coffee cup down on the counter with a sharp, deliberate click. She turned her body completely toward Julian, making her face look soft, vulnerable, and entirely fabricated. "Julian, can I be entirely honest with you?" she asked, her voice trembling with a practiced imitation of sisterly concern. "I'm so sorry to be the one to say this. I love Clara, I really do, but you deserve the absolute truth before you walk down that aisle. She is only using you to fund her lifestyle, Julian. She wants your money. Ask her about the design firm she ran into the ground in Chicago. Ask her about the man she's been hiding." My mother didn't say a word to defend me. Instead, she just sat there at my kitchen island and smiled. It was the exact same smile she had worn 9 years ago. On a rainy morning in June, when she thought she had successfully buried my future for good. I didn't scream. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even set my coffee mug down. I just stood there, feeling the ceramic warmth against my palms, watching the two people who were biologically assignment to protect me try to dismantle the only truly good, untainted thing I had left in this world. If you are listening to this right now, and you have ever had to hold your breath in your own home while your own blood tried to rewrite your character, do me a favor. Pause this video, go down to the comments, and type the word "witnessed." Let me know the city and the time where you are listening from. I want to know how many of us have had to survive the quiet sabotage of a toxic family. Because what my mother and Chloe didn't realize was that Julian wasn't shocked. He didn't look at me with doubt. He looked at them. They had absolutely no idea that Julian had been quietly collecting the absolute truth for 5 months. They thought they were bringing an end to my wedding. What they actually did was wake up a silence I had been feeding for 9 long years. To understand why my mother and sister felt so comfortable walking into my home and attempting to trade my future for their own satisfaction, we have to look at the exact architecture of the lie I let them live in. For the past 3 years, if you asked my mother, Patricia, what her youngest daughter did for a living, she would sigh, adjust her pearls, and say, "Oh, Clara does some little freelance consulting from her apartment. You know how she is. She likes her little independent projects, but she's never quite found her footing after her difficult 20s." That misunderstanding was not an accident. It was a masterpiece of emotional engineering that I spent 9 years curating. Every text message, every shared update, every single piece of data I allowed to cross the state line from Tennessee to my family's home in Knoxville was strictly rationed. The reality? I am the sole owner and creative director of Vance Architectural Textiles, located in a gorgeous, high-ceilinged corner space right in the heart of the Gulch in Nashville. I have 6 full-time employees. My client list includes boutique hotels in Atlanta, historic restorations in Charleston, and the phone call that changed everything in 2023. A referral from the wife of a professional hockey player for the Nashville Predators that filled our project calendar for an entire 18 months straight. Last year, Vance Architectural Textiles billed just over $1.4 million. My family knew absolutely nothing about that number. Why? Because I learned very early in life that in my family, success was treated like a communal crop. If I grew something beautiful, my mother didn't celebrate it. She harvested it to feed my sister Chloe's insatiable need to be the center of gravity. In our household, there was a deeply entrenched rule. Clara is the useful one, the stable baseline, the backup plan. Chloe is the wanted one. Chloe is the star. Have you ever had to hide your biggest blessings from the people who raised you just so they wouldn't try to shrink them? It's an exhausting way to live, isn't it? You catch yourself speaking in a quieter voice, downplaying your promotions, wearing cheaper clothes to family holidays, all to keep the fragile peace from shattering. Type the word shield in the comments if you've ever had to build a fortress around your achievements just to keep your own family from tearing them down. I met Julian Castellan in March of last year, and he was the first person who refused to let me shrink. We were at a charity fundraiser for a local children's hospital. I was standing near a gorgeous, hand-knotted antique Persian rug, tracing the faded indigo dye with the toe of my shoe, when this tall, quiet man in a tailored charcoal suit walked up beside me. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask what I did for a living. Instead, he asked me 3 incredibly specific questions about the weaving density and the vegetable dye used in the rug's border. When I answered him with the exact historical terminology, he smiled a slow, fascinatingly observant smile. He told me his work was just boring strategy consulting. It took me 3 weeks to realize that his boutique firm, which operates out of Nashville and Atlanta, was the exact corporate advisory engine that had subtly directed 2 of my largest commercial clients directly to my studio door. He had known who I was from the very beginning. He had looked at my work, respected it in absolute silence, and then sought me out just to hear my voice. Julian proposed to me on the 19th of September. We were sitting on the porch of a small, rented timber cabin nestled deep in the mountains of Asheville, watching the fog roll across the Blue Ridges. He didn't make a grand theatrical production out of it. He just slipped his hand into mine, pulled a vintage emerald-cut ring from his pocket, and asked me if he could spend the rest of his life making sure I never had to fight alone. I cried for exactly 10 seconds, and then I laughed, and he laughed right along with me. We kept the engagement a total secret from my mother for 2 full weeks. I wanted to live inside that unblemished joy before the family machinery could find a way to rust it. When I finally called my mother to tell her, there was a long, heavy pause on the line. She didn't say, "Clara, I am so incredibly happy for you." She didn't ask to see the ring. She didn't ask how he proposed. Instead, she drew in a sharp breath and said, "Oh, honey, he's a wonderful catch, a truly magnificent catch." A catch. Like Julian was a prize fish I had managed to pull out of a wealthy pond that she had personally stocked for someone else. I could hear the gears turning in her head over the phone lines, the silent calculation of how this new alignment could benefit Chloe, how Julian's family assets could be leveraged, and how my sudden elevation threatened the neat little narrative she had spent my entire life composing. She didn't see a daughter finding love. She saw a resource she hadn't yet figured out how to control. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, the 2nd of May, at St. George's Episcopal Church in Belle Meade. It's a stunning, historic sanctuary, the kind of place where the silence feels heavy and sacred. We had kept the guest list incredibly intimate. Just 46 people for the ceremony, mostly close friends. My father Edward driving in from Knoxville, and Julian's family. My mother and sister were on that list because, if I am being completely honest with you over this coffee, I didn't yet know how to write a guest list without them. I was still operating under the old conditioning. The guilt of exclusion is a powerful tool in a toxic household. Then came the second week of August, an ordinary Tuesday at exactly 11:32 in the morning. I was sitting in my studio for a major commercial project in Mountain Brook. My receptionist, Megan, buzzed my desk. "Clara," she said, her voice sounding slightly confused. "There's a Cassidy Riley on the line from Pinecrest Brand Studio in Atlanta. She says she's doing a final stage background verification for a high-level job applicant. She needs to speak with the owner." I picked up the phone, expecting a standard reference call for one of my former interns. "This is Clara Vance," I said. The woman on the other end cleared her throat. "Miss Vance, thank you for taking my call. I'm reaching out regarding an applicant named Caroline Hartwell Boone. Your sister, correct?" "Yes," I replied, a sudden familiar knot tightening in my stomach. "Chloe is my sister." "Right," Cassidy continued, flipping through papers on her end. Her resume lists a prestigious commercial textile and design residencies at the Chicago Urban Incubator Group from the summer of 2017. Our standard background verification to the Chicago Landlord and Program Directory returned a formal record under your legal name, Clara Vance. When we questioned her about the discrepancy, your sister explained that she used your name as a professional nickname during that period because you shared a unified portfolio. I wanted to verify that detail before we finalized her executive offer. There is a very specific absolute silence that happens inside your skull right before your body figures out what your mind has just understood. It's the feeling of the floor dropping away beneath your feet while the walls stay exactly where they are. I took a slow breath, forced my voice to remain completely level, and said, "I have never participated in the Chicago Urban Incubator Program. I have never shared a portfolio with my sister, and I have no information about why she would use my name on a corporate application." The line went completely dead for 4 seconds. "Thank you, Miss Vance," Cassidy said, her tone instantly shifting to a cold, legal professional register. "That is all the information we need. I'll follow up internally." When the call disconnected, I didn't move. I sat at my desk for 40 minutes, staring at the dust motes dancing in the Nashville sunlight. Then, I quietly closed my office door, opened my laptop, and went back into the deepest archives of my personal history. I want to share a memory with you now. It's a memory of a girl who was 22 years old. She isn't me anymore, but she still lives in the quietest room of my chest, and on certain rainy mornings, I can still hear her breathing. In June 2017, I stood in a chilly corporate hallway in Chicago, holding a rescission letter on heavy linen paper. My mother rubbed my back, whispering that my nervous breakdown meant I wasn't ready for the commercial design lease I'd won. I believed her. I packed my bags and retreated into the safety of the dark. That was the official story. For 9 years, my mother and sister had forced me to carry the weight of that alleged breakdown. Every time I tried to take a professional risk in my 20s, my mother would lower her voice and say, "Oh, Clara, remember what happened in Chicago? We just don't want you to push yourself into that dark place again, sweetheart." They had weaponized my own self-doubt to keep me small, stable, and compliant. But sitting in my office that Tuesday in August, with the background manager's words echoing in my ears, I dug out the old archival box I kept locked in my studio drawer. Inside was the original offer letter from the Chicago Commercial Incubator, and right beside it, the rescission letter my mother had handed me in that hotel lobby in 2017. I turned on my phone's flashlight and held the 2 pages up to the light, side by side. My hands began to shake. The corporate logo on the rescission letter was exactly 4 millimeters smaller than the authentic logo on the original offer. The typography was completely different. The date on the fake letter used periods between the numbers. An exact match for the unique formatting my mother used when she printed the weekly bulletins for her church in Knoxville. My mother had typed the rescission letter herself on the family desktop computer. She had intercepted the real landlord communications, called the program directors, while pretending to be a distraught relative, and claimed I had suffered a severe psychological collapse and had to withdraw. And then, 2 days later, my sister Chloe had boarded a flight to Chicago, walked into that commercial space with a portfolio cover that bore my name, and lived my dream life for 3 months using my identity. I sat in my office until the sun went down completely, watching the streetlights outside my window flick on one by one, casting long, fractured shadows across my desk. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. When you find out that your entire 20s were built on a foundation of manufactured madness, something inside you goes completely cold and perfectly still. The frantic, desperate girl who wanted her mother's approval died in that office that night. The woman who replaced her understood one thing perfectly. If you confront a narcissist with a grievance, they will just rewrite the argument until you look like the villain. But if you confront them with a ledger of objective, undeniable facts, they collapse. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Chloe. I didn't even call Julian for 5 more days. I needed to know exactly how deep the roots of this deception went before I showed anyone my cards. I started by looking for the original leasing director from the 2017 Chicago Urban Incubator program. His name was Arthur Sterling. It took me 3 days to track him down on LinkedIn. He had left the commercial real estate world in 2021 and was now running a private consulting firm out of a quiet suburb just north of Chicago. I sent him a message that was only 3 sentences long. "Mr. Sterling, my name is Clara Vance. In June of 2017, a commercial textile lease was awarded to me under my name, but I am told another woman occupied that space using my portfolio. I would deeply appreciate 15 minutes of your time on the phone if you are willing to speak." My phone rang exactly 19 minutes later. "Clara?" The voice on the other end was older, gravelly, and instantly heavy with a decade of accumulated regret. "Miss Vance, I have been praying for this phone call for 9 long years. I knew something wasn't right the second that girl walked onto our incubator floor." Arthur Sterling didn't just talk to me. He opened up a digital vault. He explained that within 2 weeks of arriving, Clara Vance couldn't explain the advanced loom weaving metrics or the specific polymer dye chemistry that had been detailed in the application portfolio. She had 0 technical skill. Then, in October of 2017, the program coordinators caught her red-handed trying to plagiarize a set of geometric textile patterns from a mid-century Italian design archive, trying to pass them off as her own work for a commercial client. We terminated her immediately for gross professional misconduct, Mr. Sterling told me, his voice tightening over the line. But when we tried to process the legal eviction and the plagiarism blacklisting, she signed the paperwork with a signature that didn't match the original lease application. We called your home number to verify. A woman claiming to be your mother answered, screaming that you were having a massive psychological breakdown and threatening to sue our firm if we ever contacted you again. We were a private corporate group, Clara. We didn't want the legal liability. We let it drop. But I kept the file. I kept everything. 2 days later, he emailed me a secure PDF file containing the complete 2017 internal archive. The intake forms, the signed termination papers, the text of the voicemails they had left, and the security badge photo. I opened the attachment, zoomed in, and there she was. My sister Chloe, staring back at the camera with a smug, defiant look, wearing a pair of non-prescription glasses to look more academic, holding a security badge that bore my legal name. That Monday night, I finally asked Julian to come over to my apartment after work. It was raining heavily, the drops drumming against my window panes, as he took off his wet trench coat. I had the entire Chicago file printed out, laid flat across my coffee table in neat chronological rows. I looked at him and said, "I need you to sit down, and I need you to listen to me until I am completely finished. Then you can ask me anything you want." Julian sat down. He didn't interrupt me once. I talked for exactly 14 minutes, my voice dropping into a low, steady rhythm as I laid out the timeline. The forged rescission letter, the stolen identity, the plagiarism charge that had been quietly sitting tied to my name for 9 years, and the mother who had switched my phone's SIM card that summer to make sure I never received the landlord's desperate calls. When I finally stopped talking, my chest was heaving. I braced myself for the reaction I had been conditioned to expect my whole life. Doubt, minimization, the classic. "But she's your mother, Clara. Surely it was a misunderstanding." Instead, Julian didn't even blink. His face didn't change. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out his iPhone, opened a password-protected note titled Vance Family Dynamics, and turned the screen around to face me. I scrolled through it. There were dozens of entries dating back to the previous Thanksgiving, when he had met my family for the first time. He had quietly documented 4 separate instances where my mother and Chloe had told stories about my alleged breakdown in Chicago, noting how the dates, the symptoms, and the details shifted completely depending on who else was in the room. He had been analyzing them like a corporate strategist tracking an ongoing fraud operation. "How long have you been keeping this?" I whispered, my voice cracking for the first time. "Since the day I realized that every time you talk about your past, your shoulders drop 3 inches because you think you're broken," Julian said softly, reaching across the table to wrap his large, warm hands securely around mine. "You didn't have a breakdown, Clara. You were targeted by people who were terrified of your light. Now, tell me what you want to do. Because, whatever it is, I am your fortress." If you are listening to this right now, and you have finally found a person who looks at your broken, gaslit pieces and quietly helps you build a wall of protection around them, type the words "real love" in the comments section below. Let's celebrate the people who refuse to let us believe the lies our toxic families told us about ourselves. For the next 4 months, Julian and I moved through our world with a quiet, synchronized precision. I didn't rush to change my lock screen. I didn't change the passwords to my email accounts. In fact, we intentionally left a digital trail. We knew my mother and Chloe were monitoring whatever scraps of information they could scrape together. In early March, my mother went so far as to hire a wedding consultant I hadn't asked for. A woman named Vivian Drexel, who immediately began calling my studio under the guise of coordinating family logistics. She was asking too many questions about Julian's family, the guest list, and our asset allocations. I let her think she had complete access, while Julian and I quietly took screenshots of every single message and email she sent. Then came the second week of March. Chloe, playing her role with a calculating desperation, accidentally ran into Julian at a high-end restaurant bar in Germantown called Henrietta Red. She was sitting alone, sipping a glass of white wine, and when she saw Julian walk in to pick up a takeout order, she pounced. She spent exactly 40 minutes trying to poison his mind. "I just worry about Clara, Julian," she told him, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "She's never quite recovered from her breakdown in 2017. Our family has had to carry her financial and emotional burdens for years, and I just pray she isn't putting you through the same nightmare she put us through. She has a history of hiding things when she panics." Julian paid for his order, gave her a polite, unreadable nod, and walked out. When he came to my apartment that night and recounted the conversation, I didn't cry. I actually smiled. "She's testing the structural integrity of her story," Julian said, pouring us both a glass of water. "She has no idea the story has already been thoroughly deconstructed." A week later, the stakes escalated from corporate identity theft to malicious social sabotage. Julian's mother, Helen Castellan, a deeply respected, elegant matriarch of Nashville society, received an anonymous, handwritten letter on plain white paper. The letter read, "Before your son commits his life and his family's reputation to this woman, you need to ask her about the secret man she has been secretly meeting in Manhattan. She is leading a double life." Helen didn't panic. She didn't call me in a fit of rage. She called Julian, read him the letter once in a perfectly calm, aristocratic voice, and then quietly burned it in her fireplace. "I just thought you should know what kind of desperation we are dealing with, honey," she told him. She didn't question me because she trusted me. When Julian told me what his mother had done, I locked myself in my studio bathroom and cried silently for 10 minutes. Not out of fear, but because for the first time in my 31 years of life, I finally knew what it felt like to be completely protected and trusted by an older woman. The absolute peak of their arrogance arrived during a Sunday family brunch at my apartment in the last week of March. My mother and Chloe showed up at 11 sharp, carrying a massive bouquet of lilies. They sat at my kitchen island, eating the bagels and lox I had laid out, pretending everything was perfectly normal. Chloe picked up a framed photograph on my console, a picture of Julian and me laughing on that foggy porch in Asheville, and turned the frame over in her hands with a practiced passive-aggressive heavy-handedness. "You always did land on your feet, didn't you, Clara?" she whispered, setting it down just a little too softly. "After everything you put us through." We moved over to the counter where my iPad was displaying our digital seating chart. My mother shifted her glasses, her eyes instantly landing on the arrangement. She noticed that Julian's mother, Helen, was placed at table 1, while she, Patricia, was assigned to table 4. Her face froze for a fraction of a second. Chloe caught it immediately. "Of course Julian's mother gets the front table, Mom," she said with a sharp, sugary edge. "That's the new family now. We're just the old history." My mother looked at Chloe, and then she turned a terrifyingly familiar, cold glare onto me. It was the exact same look she had given me in that Chicago hotel room in 2017, right before she handed me the forged letter. "Honey," she said, her voice dropping into that low, manipulative purr, Don't you think your own flesh and blood mother deserves to be at the front table? Julian's parents are hosting the entire rehearsal dinner, Mom, I replied smoothly, looking her dead in the eye. The seating layout reflects the structural reality of the event. To break the tension, I pretended to take a business call from a supplier, stepping into the hallway. Before I left the kitchen, I deliberately placed my iPhone face down on the console right near the door, knowing Chloe's eyes were tracking it. I was on the phone with Arthur Sterling, confirming his travel plans. Yes, Arthur, I whispered into the receiver. Friday night, 6:00 p.m., the Grand Pavilion Ballroom at the Hermitage Hotel. We will have a seat ready for you. When I walked back into the kitchen 4 minutes later, Chloe was just returning from the guest bathroom. Her face slightly flushed. My phone was exactly where I left it, but it had been rotated by perhaps 2 degrees. The screen lock notification had been cleared. She had seen the text preview from Julian, confirming that a guest named Arthur was arriving from Chicago on Friday morning. They left at 1:00 p.m., kissing my cheeks, thanking me for the brunch, entirely convinced they had stolen the final piece of the puzzle. As soon as their Lexus cleared my building's security gate, I called Julian. She took the bait, I told him. She saw the confirmation for Friday at the Hermitage with Arthur. Perfect, Julian replied. Thanks to an old family iCloud link, Chloe had forgotten to disconnect from an old iPad in my storage room. Her subsequent text to my mother popped up directly on my screen. He's older, like way older. Some Arthur guy from her past. We have until Friday night to expose her. My mother's response was 4 words. Then we move now. Friday, the 24th of April. The historic Grand Pavilion Ballroom at the Hermitage Hotel downtown was an absolute masterpiece of old-world elegance. High arched ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers throwing fractured amber light across 42 impeccably dressed guests, and a single grand piano in the corner where a local jazz musician named Curtis was playing low, velvety standards. I wore a long, architectural emerald silk dress that felt like armor. Julian stood beside me in a sharp navy suit, his face perfectly serene. My mother and Chloe arrived together at exactly 6:08 p.m. Looking like an operating theater crew prepared to perform a clinical social execution. They were smiling, greeting Julian's prominent relatives, entirely convinced that they held the leverage. They thought Arthur was a secret lover from my past, a ghost they could pull out of my closet to dismantle my integrity in front of Nashville's elite. What they didn't see was the older, dignified man sitting quietly at table 8, nursing a glass of sparkling water. It was Arthur Sterling. He had flown in from Chicago that morning. He wasn't my secret past. He was their legal ledger. At exactly 7 p.m., the room shifted seamlessly toward the seated dinner. The ambient chatter grew warm and bright as the first course was served. But the tranquility was intentionally short-lived. True to form, before the main entrees could even clear the kitchen, my mother stood up from her seat at table 4. She hadn't been scheduled to speak, but she tapped her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon anyway, drawing the polite, unhurried attention of the entire room. I'd like to share a brief word about our family, my mother said, her voice dropping into that sweet southern maternal purr that had managed to deceive me for 20 years. Clara has always been our delicate dreamer. She's always been so profoundly fragile, and our family has spent a decade protecting her from her own instability. We are just so deeply grateful that a stable, wonderful man like Julian has chosen to shoulder that burden with us. Before the room could even process the subtle, toxic backhandedness of her toast, Chloe stood up right beside her. She didn't let the applause start. She raised her glass, locking eyes with Julian at the head table. As her older sister, I have to echo that honesty. Chloe said, her voice ringing out clearly through the grand ballroom. Good men deserve absolute transparency, Julian. And the truth is, my sister is only marrying you to fund her studio lifestyle. She has spent years running away from her failures, including the design projects she completely destroyed in Chicago. If you don't believe me, Julian, why don't you ask her about the older man named Arthur she's been secretly meeting behind your back? A suffocating, heavy silence descended upon the ballroom, a held breath multiplied by 42 guests. My mother nodded with an air of clinical finality as if she had just delivered a necessary act of mercy. They both looked down at me, waiting for the panic, waiting for the tears, waiting for the fragile girl from 2017 to collapse under the weight of their gaslighting. I didn't move an inch. I sat perfectly straight in my emerald silk dress, took a slow sip of water, and looked at my fiancé. Julian stood up. He didn't look shocked, angry, or betrayed. He reached smoothly into the inside pocket of his navy suit jacket, pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope, and laid flat down on the crisp white tablecloth. He unclasped the metal tie, opened the folder, and pulled out a single document, holding it up so that the entire front row of tables could see it clearly. "You mean this, Arthur?" Julian asked, his voice completely level, completely devoid of anger, echoing with a chilling authority through the silent room. Chloe's eyes hit the document and stopped dead. The smirk on her face dissolved so quickly it looked like a physical collapse. "This isn't a love letter, Chloe," Julian continued, his voice cutting through the stillness like a razor. "This is the original forfeited 2017 commercial lease agreement from the Chicago Urban Incubator Group, and attached right behind it is a certified forensic handwriting analysis completed last week, proving that every single signature on the plagiarism waiver and the subsequent eviction notice was signed by your hand, while fraudulently using my fiancé's legal identity." The silence in the Grand Pavilion ballroom was no longer polite. It was clinical. It was the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of a courtroom right after a key witness completely destroys her own case. Chloe's hands began to tremble so violently that the champagne glass she was holding clinked sharply against her ring before she practically dropped it onto the table. Her face had turned a translucent, pasty white. "Julian," my mother stammered, her voice losing its southern velvet and shrinking into a thin, desperate screech. "This is an outrageous fabrication. Clara has had massive psychological issues for years. She's been seeing therapists. We did what we had to do to protect her reputation after her breakdown. You're being manipulated by a deeply unstable girl." At that exact moment, Arthur Sterling stood up from table 8. He didn't raise his voice, but as he adjusted his charcoal suit coat, his presence completely commanded the room. He walked slowly toward the head table, stepping directly into the amber glow of the main chandelier. "We didn't manipulate anything, Patricia," Arthur said, his voice carrying the calm, unhurried weight of a man who had spent 40 years running commercial real estate operations. "My name is Arthur Sterling. In 2017, I was the executive leasing director for the Chicago Urban Incubator Program. I am the man who personally signed the acceptance letter for Clara Vance. And I am also the man who caught this young woman, Chloe, attempting to pass off stolen mid-century Italian textile designs as her own work." He turned a quarter turn, looking directly at the tables where Julian's family sat. "The woman who occupied our commercial studio space for 3 months was not Clara," Arthur stated with absolute clarity. "It was Chloe Hartwell. She presented a forged corporate withdrawal letter that we now know was printed from her mother's home computer. When we discovered the plagiarism, she signed the termination and blacklisting documents using Clara's name. I have the original security badge photo right here in this certified legal archive, and I will happily swear to these facts in any civil or criminal deposition this family wishes to pursue. My mother looked around the room, her chest heaving as she searched desperately for a single friendly face. A single ally among Nashville's elite. She found absolutely nothing. Julian's uncle, Walter Castellan, who had spent over 2 decades presiding as a federal judge in Middle Tennessee, was staring at her over the rim of his wine glass with a cold, terrifying detachment. It was the exact look an experienced judge gives a defendant whose defense has just completely collapsed on the stand. I finally stood up from my chair. I didn't pull out a piece of paper, and I didn't raise my voice above a conversational level. I looked at my father, Edward, who was sitting at table 1, his eyes wet with tears, and then I looked directly at my mother and sister. For 9 years, I said, my voice echoing steadily off the high arched ceilings. You allowed me to believe that I was too weak, too broken, and too fragile to handle my own success. You told the entire family that I had a mental collapse in Chicago because you needed a screen to hide the fact that Chloe stole my identity, stole my portfolio, and ran my opportunity into the ground with gross plagiarism. You even switched the SIM card on my phone that summer to make sure the program directors could never reach me to expose the lie. I didn't lose my mind in 2017, Mom. I lost my voice because I trusted the people who gave it to me. I paused, letting the words sit heavily in the air. I am not here tonight to file a lawsuit, I continued softly, looking around at the 42 witnesses who were watching the truth settle into the room. The statute of limitations has run on the fraud, and frankly, your opinions no longer carry any currency in my life. I am here tonight for one single reason: to take back the narrative of my own life in front of the people I actually care about. The silence is officially over. Helen Castellan set her wineglass down with an elegant, definitive click. She stood up from her chair at table 1 and turned her body completely toward my mother and sister. Her face was a mask of aristocratic calm, the exact expression of a matriarch enforcing an absolute boundary. Patricia, Helen said, her voice perfectly level, carrying across the silent ballroom without an ounce of strain. We have all heard quite enough. Your daughter, Clara, has spoken, and the objective witnesses have spoken. I think it would be best for everyone involved if you collected your things and went home now, while there is still a modicum of grace left in this room. My mother stood frozen for one final, desperate second, her lips parted as if she wanted to invent a brand new lie right there on the spot. But she looked around the ballroom, met the cold, unyielding stares of 42 people, and realized the machinery of her manipulation had finally run out of power. She reached down, grabbed Chloe's arm hard, and tried to pull her up. Chloe tried to stand, but her legs clearly wouldn't hold her weight. She sank right back into her chair, her head dropping completely into her trembling hands. A hotel captain stepped forward quietly from the shadows of the ballroom door, giving Julian a brief nod. He gently helped Chloe up by the elbow and guided her toward the side exit. My mother followed closely behind, her head down, her navy silk blouse disappearing into the hallway. I noted the time on the ballroom clock. It was exactly 8:42 p.m. It was the exact same minute they had left my kitchen the Wednesday before. The trap had snapped shut at the precise moment it was meant to. The ballroom remained absolutely still for 11 seconds after the door clicked shut. Then Curtis, the jazz pianist in the corner, looked toward Helen, received a single, graceful nod, and began to play a soft, beautiful rendition of Clair de Lune. Walter Castellan stood up, raised his glass high, and said 2 words, "To Clara." 42 glasses rose into the amber light as one. standing there with Julian's arm wrapped securely around my waist, and my father Edward walking over to hold my hand. A profound wave of clarity washed over me. For 9 years, I had spent holidays alone in apartments I paid for entirely by myself, convincing my soul that I preferred the isolation. But looking into the eyes of the people in that room, I understood for the very first time that my solitude had never been my genuine preference. It had only ever been the emotional budget I could afford to keep myself safe from the people who were supposed to love me. Our wedding took place 8 days later, on a cool, blindingly bright Saturday morning at St. George's Episcopal. I wore an ivory silk gown with long, tailored sleeves. But inside the bodice, sewn directly against the seam right over my beating heart, was a tiny, jagged square of faded black leather. I had cut it myself from the cover of the handmade design portfolio I had built in college back in 2017. The portfolio that had never made it to Chicago because of a mother's greed. The cover finally made it down the aisle with me. Julian's vows were exactly 5 sentences long, but the final sentence is the one I will carry with me until my lungs take their last breath. I promise I will never make you choose between being yourself and being loved. The real-world consequences unfolded with a quiet, devastating logic in the weeks that followed. 5 days after our rehearsal dinner, Pinecrest Brand Studio officially rescinded their executive employment offer to Chloe, citing material misrepresentations regarding her professional history. Within a month, word of the Chicago identity fraud leaked through corporate channels, causing 2 of her largest consulting retainers in Atlanta to cut her loose. She had to put her townhouse on the market and move back to Knoxville. My mother didn't escape the fallout either. She was politely but firmly informed by the chair of the Knoxville Garden Club that her annual membership would not be renewed, and 3 women she had considered her closest friends for 20 years completely stopped returning her phone calls. The social capital she traded my future for had vanished into thin air. On the first Monday morning after our honeymoon, I walked into Vance Architectural Textiles. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and began mapping out a brand new commercial resort project. The morning light came through my grand studio windows in that same beautiful, familiar slant across the concrete floor. If you have stayed with me until the very end of this story, I want you to remember one thing. You do not owe your sanity to a toxic family structure, and you do not have to live inside a narrative they wrote to keep you weak. Go down to the comments one last time, type the word boundaries, and let me know if you are ready to take your own voice back. They stole 9 years of my story. They will never steal another sentence.